Hello and welcome to the Fundamental Process podcast and YouTube through Living Process. Hello everyone, it's been a while. And tonight I'm following up with my good colleague Dana right here.
Hi.
So, I expect we're going to be talking about many good different things, and something that had really struck me is that you were mentioning conceptions of space, and we were discussing how the idea of how space is understood affects architecture and how we build. And you had come up with an idea that I put the label on of reciprocal space. And just talk about how you arrived at that in an interesting way through an exhibition you'd done.
Well, at this exhibition, what we had sort of created was by gathering objects. And with my exploration, I had decided to take my objects and to compress them within a box. Once this box had then compressed my objects being sort of the free forms within the box, had slowly started to push out of the box, and this being a concept of compression and expansion.
Right. So for the people listening at home, the idea that you had defined a space with a box, and then you were defining things that took up space within that box. And then eventually the things that you defined ended up having all the space within the box defined, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where many people would stop. But did you?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
No, actually what I did was, because it kept expanding, the box slowly shifted and broke open. Once that box broke open, the free forms that were within, that were the found objects, slowly started to just keep expanding infinitely. And the box then was expanded. It was open.
And I thought this was interesting the first time you mentioned it, because the idea of infinitely expanding space is something that our culture is very accustomed to. The type of thing that I talked about with Russ and Kyle on the Brothers of the Serpent podcast is the idea of, among other things, infinite space. What Oswald Spengler wrote about, that the idea of what we call Western culture, what he called Faustian, they understood space as kind of XYZ axis infinitely expanding. This wasn't true for all cultures. The Greeks and Romans understood space as embodied, physically embodied. The Egyptians understood it as a path, straight path. The Chinese and Japanese understood it as more of the natural Tao path. And so you kind of found an interesting limit to the Western conception, which you had your own kind of instinctive answer to, right? The space was opened, was expanding infinitely, and then what happened?
So the concept then reverses, because now you have these free forms that are on the outside, and the compression, the box that was within, just holding itself down. And so now that they're flipped, the free forms are outside the box, and the box just naturally wants to close. The box is compression and gravity itself. It is holding itself together, and the free forms are now outside of the box. And now, because it's become this sort of reciprocal space, as you say, it is now hovering over this box, now sort of an invasion. And this invasion, what I sort of used as a conception of this, and to illustrate this idea of reciprocal space, is that I used these alien life forms. And so then, now that the alien forms are brought into the equation, they were taking on this idea of these free forms.
And this was a conceptual project for studio, right? So when you say alien, you simply mean foreign, alien to the system, maybe outer space idea, but just an abstract idea.
Yeah.
Of different outside.
Yes, alien to the system. And now this alien sort of system is now hovering over this box, which becomes the landform, and now this does turn into a fantasy of outer space aliens and planet Earth. In this concept that I was working with, that I used as an illustration to illustrate this concept of reciprocal space, which, these outer space aliens then are like the invasion, and so then the outer space aliens land on planet Earth, and then we use that reciprocal space again, and we inhabit their spaces, and we take their pods, their alien pods, and we inhabit those spaces. So it started with the Earth planet homes and the outer space aliens coming, and reciprocal space happens, and it flips again. So,
and what was really interesting to me is that you have a kind of, Aristotle being the first to conceptualize dialectics, with thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then, with Hegel, and infamously with Marx talking about, an opposite, a momentum, a counter-momentum. They interact, and out of that you have forward a new development. And this is an interesting heuristic, a lens of understanding things that you can see in many things, with Newton's laws of motion, force, equal and opposite reaction, motion, male, female, child, up, down, balance. And so with, and you can apply this in terms of culture and building history in this kind of really interesting imaginary way with the alien force and the domestic force. But if you can look at that in terms of the development of history, where you have people, Greek colonists, Italians, Naples, or you have the Vikings, Inuits, Vinland, and that one didn't last long. And then you have the United States, where we know the history. And so you, in a real way, you have this. This is describing the process that you're describing in an abstract way applies in concrete ways to many areas. And just like you can consider the ultimate expression of the kind of Western Faustian expansion being the expansion into outer space. And we saw that 51 years ago today, actually, we are recording on July 20th. So 51, I think years ago today was the moon landing, and one of the most important things that happened not at that moon landing, but at one of the times when they orbited far out, is that when they turned the camera back at the Earth, and that was a really important moment, because I think that our culture is getting, even our economy, is understanding that to focus only on the expansion is not really sustainable. It's not even accurate. And there are wonderful things that can happen in this dialogue and in this switching that you're talking about. How do you think that applies to spaces and how we might physically build?
Thinking about this idea of the outer space aliens and the planet Earth then helps us to think about immigration, helps us to think about all types of different ways in which different elements and different cultures and different architecture, archetypes, all kinds of diversity then can relate to itself, flip, and then flip back again, and just kind of play this dance of space and culture and blending, where things never truly become one, but they do definitely create a dance that holds a center space of pushing and pulling, which will always be in all of culture clash and all types of differences. There will always be this center of gravity that holds things together, yet a fear and a sense of pushing that will keep things to an extent at different sides of a spectrum.
Right, so a centripetal pulling in together and a centrifugal pulling out. And one might be dominant more than the other. And so I like this. You've kind of taken the idea of the pendulum and realized that it's not as simple. A pendulum can describe it well, but it really is a dialogue of two forces trading places. The centripetal, it seems like a pendulum with something pulling in and pulling out, but it's really two forces that are always present, and one is simply stronger than the other, and eventually they switch, and sometimes they're balanced. In the places that you have lived, would you say that there's a good example of this kind of force dialogue and this switching of spaces? I can think of a quick example of like the idea of urban densification out to the suburbs and then back in with gentrification. Is there anything that you can think of that's a good example of these forces in dialogue in urban areas?
Yes, when you say gentrification, that definitely is sort of new money, things coming to reestablish its new idea, new frames, and there will be a pushing and pulling where citizens will want the gentrification. At the same time, many citizens will not want the gentrification, and there will be a sense of pushing and pulling, and because of that push and pull, it will never fully get to that ideal dreamlike state that many citizens would dream to have as the perfect gentrification idea. And at the same time, the people who do not at all want the gentrification will also have to compromise on what they'd like to conserve and what they'd like to keep as the same. So in a way, gentrification does happen, though it doesn't happen usually to the full extent because of that push and pull, and you can never truly keep away gentrification because of that.
I think that's pretty excellent. That's a really good way to describe it. In fact, it's not a homeostasis. It's not a steady state. It's homeohoresis. It's a steady pattern of actions and dynamic forces. Well, this is great. We're definitely going to set this up and do it again. By the way, could you hand me my pipe? Thank you.